Hello and welcome to Head-Mounted Destinations, a podcast about VR and VR game development. We provide our perspective as developers and give you, the listener, a sneak peek behind the curtain as to how VR games are made. I'm your friendly neighborhood host and level designer, Carlos, and with me, as always...
Hello, I'm Matt. I'm a gameplay programmer.
And surprise, audience! We have a really cool interview lined up today. We are joined by two special guests from Cloudhead Games, Antony Stevens and Daniel Taylor. Would you guys like to introduce yourselves?
Hello, I'm Antony Stevens. I am a writer and designer at Cloudhead Games, and I've worked on Pistol Whip.
Hi, I'm Daniel Taylor. I'm the lead level designer at Cloudhead Games, and I also work on Pistol Whip.
That's right, folks. It's finally happening. We have Pistol Whip devs with us, and we're going to get all the sweet information you've been chomping at the bit for.
Can you both give a short explanation of your journey through the industry and how you ended up at Cloudhead Games? I'll start with you, Antony.
I went to university for creative writing. I did some journalism on the side. I kind of started in the games industry. I started my own website, started doing reviews, got some writers, doing that kind of thing. And I went to university for that. And in university, then I took a game theory course to just study game design a little bit. And I met my professor who directed me to the writer at the time at Cloudhead who was looking for someone to do social media and blogs and stuff like that. So I graduated university and immediately went to work for Cloudhead. And so I was writing blogs and doing social media and things like that. And then I was just working really closely with the dev team and learning a lot about design and VR. And I started doing a bunch of QA work. And then eventually that kind of turned into full-fledged design work. And I did some writing and design for Aperture Hand Lab. And then I became a full-time designer with Pistol Whip.
Sweet. How about you, Dan? What's your journey to Cloudhead?
Yeah, well, like Antony, I started at actually same university, Vancouver Island University. I was in the digital media program, and one of the days we had a guy come in to give a talk, and he made video games. He was making advert games for like Disney and a bunch of other big evil corporations. So I was like, oh, that's cool. So I went and talked to him after his speech, and he basically told me to come work with him in the summertime. So I went and did that, and Denny, the Cloudhead owner, was also working with him at that time. So then when we were working for him, the Oculus Kickstarter happened, and Denny was already part of the, I think the website was meanttobeseen.com. There was like a big like VR forum that's like where Palmer Luckey and all like the OG VR people were. So Denny was kind of like a part of that. And he left to go, I guess, follow his dream and make a VR game. I didn't go work with him right away, but after the Kickstarter, we got back in contact, and I came on as kind of like the QA community guy. Wasn't much a community back then, so it was more QA. Yeah, so then we started working on one of the Kickstarter awards was the exploration school for the gallery. So we started working on that. I was again just QA on that. We decided to kind of split the gallery up into episodes and kind of do like a more story-driven cinematic kind of experience. And since my background is kind of in video and that sort of thing, I was in charge of all the cinematics, and that's when I became cinematic designer. And then I was basically cinematic designer all the way up until Pistol Whip, in which I became that level designer / animator. And by the way, I have no animation experience, but I know how to work a motion capture suit.
We call him the Danimator.
Yeah, so there's a bunch of animations in the game. We actually have a tool in Unity called the Danimator, which is gonna be there forever.
Awesome.
And then I became the lead level designer, and now we're here.
Quite a journey.
Yeah, it sounds like you both followed sort of similar paths of coming into the studio and then gaining new skills and finding out what you're passionate about and moving around to different positions, wearing many hats potentially.
Yeah, totally. Like it was so much learning on the go with this. Like I dropped out of university. Well, didn't drop out. I didn't go back. I guess that counts as dropping out. But like I learned so much more just like taking this job and like just learning on the fly than being at school.
That's a sentiment I've heard from a lot of different developers, at least in the industry, that there's kind of a bit of this like scoff or poo-pooing to those who go to higher education for like game design, whereas people who have been in the industry for like 20 or however many years are like, it's so much more valuable just to get into the job space, like immediately. I guess I would like to know, like, what are your feelings on that, both like you and Antony? Like, do you feel like it was good that you guys went to higher education before going into the games industry, or do you feel like just getting that first job like really exponentially brought your skills up more than your school experience?
Yeah, I think it's different for everybody, right? Like for me, I wasn't really like a big school guy.
Mm-hmm. Well, what do you mean by that? Because we got work hard, play hard people. We got people who play hard. Like, where do you fall on the spectrum?
I just find the structure of school boring. Like going in and just sitting there and have someone talk to you. Like I like getting my hands dirty and like going in and like figuring out how to do stuff. Mm-hmm. Reading stuff in a textbook and having people tell me like how to do things. It's just not the way I learn, I guess. So jumping into that job super early was for me personally super valuable, but like for someone else, like going into school and getting that solid base, like obviously is like super valuable.
Right.
Yeah, for me then, I went to school for writing. I didn't specifically go to school for game design, right? And so I had a really unique structure for my school. I had a lot of workshops. I was really hands-on with all my stuff, and I found that experience really, really valuable for my writing side of things. But in terms of like getting into design, certainly the hands-on approach, being with a small team like Cloudhead. I think one of your questions was like, how big was the team when we started? For me, we were 9 people when the team started, and I think Dan was 4 or 5 people. So having that small team where, you need to wear all these different hats and like, I'm doing QA, I'm doing social media, but then I'm also learning about design at the same time. Really, really valuable. And when you think about game development and game design and going to school for it too, really expensive in general. Those schools really, really, really expensive. And especially for VR, there's not really a lot of schooling for that. We're talking about a brand new medium, a brand new design language, stuff that developers themselves are still trying to figure out. So who could teach that? We have some really brilliant exceptions, like Jesse Schell's a great instructor. He does university teaching and teaches VR and all that kind of thing. But there's not really a whole bunch of that around the world, and certainly not maybe in a more remote area like our team is. We're in the west coast of Canada on Vancouver Island, not even in a major city. There's just not a lot of options there unless you're doing something online, I guess. But at that point, just find a team and get your hands dirty. Really valuable stuff, especially in VR.
For sure.
Yeah.
And it's great that you call out the multiple hats thing, because as soon as you said 9 people, I was like, oh boy, like the engineer is the sound designer, is the art director. But that kind of draws me to another question that I wanted to pose to you, Antony. How did it feel transitioning from like a primarily writing background to then being like the social media person, trying to be like that, I guess, either the face of the company or like the middle person that the gamers communicate to the company with, and then ultimately becoming a level dev or a mapper?
Yeah, I mean, it was an incredible experience for me. It's always been a dream. I've always, since I was a kid, thinking critically about games and thinking about design and how levels work and how mechanics work and really thinking about games in that way. So it was a really natural evolution for me. And specifically with Cloudhead, again, small team, many hats. When I'm joining in on social media, then I'm talking with all of these people, right? I'm talking with the lead level designer. I'm talking with the artists. I'm talking with the sound designers. I'm talking with the CEO. So I'm just learning all of these different things about all the different components of the studio. And design just happened to be the kind of one side of things that was really compelling for me. So I made that transition and I'm very happy to have made it because I'm really happy with the work I've done on Pistol Whip, and it's really fun to build levels.
Awesome. And I guess like kind of my last question for this sort of starting segment would be, what has kept you at Cloudhead this long? Because you guys you've had your journey, but you've been at Cloudhead for a while, so it must be a really cool, fun place to work, or there must be some sort of je ne sais quoi, like keeping you there and keeping you passionate.
For me, like my whole career's been at Cloudhead, right? So like I love the people who work here. Like management's great. but like the main thing for me is basically my whole career is being at the forefront of technology and always seeing this new stuff that's going on and having to figure out how to make games work with all this new technology, and it's super fun and super exciting. We used to joke like it's like being in the Wild West. There's no like playbook about what's going on, and that's I find that super exciting and super fun.
Like Antony mentioned, the whole new design language that needs to be discovered and refined through people making games for VR.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. So Dan, you've been here for 8 years now. Is that right? 7, 8?
10, 9,
Jesus,
10.
that long? Oh my God. Yeah. So I've only been here for 5 years.
Congratulations.
Yeah. Good job, Dan. I've only been here for 5 years. But that 5 years is the consumer launch of VR. I joined the team the team basically right as they launched their first consumer title called the Starseed. I've stayed with Cloudhead because they've continued to be at the forefront of everything. We launched Pistol Whip when the Quest launched. I think we were the first, if not the second studio in the entire world to receive what became the Index, right? Just this cutting edge hardware, cutting edge software, and just never really like phoning it in. Like even Pistol Whip, it's a lower scope game. It's kind of arcadey. It's kind of straightforward. You would think, but it's a first of its kind experience. There had never been a rhythm shooter like that before that had the kind of agency that you have in Pistol Whip, where we talk a lot about Pistol Whip having kind of no line in the sand. It's not like a traditional rhythm game where you can you have to hit a certain thing at a certain beat. It's a very freeform rhythm game where you can shoot anything on any beat. And there had never been a game like that before. So even though we did the kind of this smaller scope thing compared to what we started with the Gallery, which were these big, bold adventure games, we still had this really innovative and original idea with Pistol Whip. And that's the kind of software that we build at Cloudhead, and that's the kind of thinking we have at Cloudhead. We just saw we got the Steam Deck early on for development purposes, and we could see how Pistol Whip works on that. To start thinking about maybe future devices with similar technology. Who's to say those exist? Lots of really cool cutting edge stuff, and that we're doing it all too. For me, is like we're doing it all on Vancouver Island on the west coast of Canada. This is my home. This is where I've lived almost my entire life. And it's not where you normally hear about really studios that have like this big global effect, right? Pistol Whip is one of the top 10 games on the entire Quest platform. And we're doing that again from just this tiny remote town in Vancouver Island.
That sounds awesome. Like that, you guys got me genuinely pumped up for Cloudhead and like whatever. Be careful now. Your Amazon packages are going to get extra eyes towards them because everyone's going to think it's a brand new headset or something. No, but that's sick. Like, it's amazing that, such a small team can create something that is so groundbreaking, but also like wide reaching. We're able to like bring our weird ideas or even like just general notions and feelings, such as being John Wick in the nightclub in the movie, and like sharing that with the world.
It's a brand new medium, right? We're not just creating that John Wick feeling in like a 2D game in kind of a platform and a format that people are really used to. We're coming up with those feelings, and we mentioned this new design language that we have with VR that we've only been working on for less than 10 years in the consumer space, and even less than that if you want to consider things like tetherless and hand tracking, right? 5, 6, 7 years. So we're not just building that type of experience for flat. We're building it for VR, which is the future of computing. So we're advancing the future of computing at the same time. We're getting more eyes and more hands on these devices so that these hardware makers are seeing more value in producing more of this hardware and subsidizing the costs, and I think it all pushes the whole industry forward. And by nature, this industry is the future of technology, so we're kind of pushing it all forward in a way.
So you said something that I want to touch on, which is that it's a whole new medium, VR. Mm-hmm. And that's something, I've been saying for a long time. And a lot of people, I think, sort of think of it as just an extension of flat screen gaming, where it's like almost a peripheral, but it really is a completely new medium. I'm curious, you've been around in the VR space sort of from the start. Have you seen a shift in either the internal mindset of the studio or what you're hearing when you talk with other developers about how experimental you need to be versus, oh, we've got it all figured out, we sort of know the best practices now for VR, we can just make games. And
yeah, I mean, we've always been trying to figure out what works in VR. Like, it's still such a new medium that, like, there's always new stuff to figure out. Like, when we were first starting, the big thing was, hey, how do we move around in VR? And we came up with teleportation, and now that's super dated. Then we started coming up with other things. Like, there's always new things to design for, especially because the technology is always changing. There's always new stuff coming out with these new headsets, like when the Index came out, we had to figure out how to use like fingers in VR.
Something that was really, really important, and I think has been a through line for the studio, has been comfort. Dan mentioned teleportation. Teleportation was the result of trying to find a comfortable way to locomote around a world, because we realized very early on that things like stick movement and free movement and smooth movement made a lot of people uncomfortable and motion sick and turned off of VR. So one of our biggest challenges as a studio is, from my opinion, has really been like nailing that comfort. With Pistol Whip, we are still thinking about that. We realized we wanted more kinetic movement, so we have this forced momentum, but we have a lot of comfort affordances. The speed is only so fast. There is no slowing down or speeding up. There's really specific level design in order to maintain things like peripheral stabilization so you don't get vection issues. And when we think about the future of VR, I think that's really important to, even if we want to do something ambitious, still trying to figure out the most comfortable way to do it. There are, stick move and free motion or free movement options that have, things like vection portals or blinders, so that you're more comfortable moving in that way. But I think it's really, really important to keep, however you're innovating, to keep thinking about comfort, because we need people to be comfortable so they don't get turned off the headset in the first place.
What was the term you used? Vection corners?
Vection portals, yeah, that's what Denny calls them, our CEO. The idea is, some people call them blinders, things like that.
So you're referring to the like dark circle outline that basically comes around your vision so you like don't get sick? Is that what you're referring to?
Exactly right. Exactly right. Yeah, and so the idea there is that once you create like this really stable peripheral, there's nothing moving in the peripheral vision, then you don't get that kind of motion sickness, that vection issue.
I definitely want to get around to Pistol Whip, but first I want to like give the listeners a little bit of context about the studio, because the studio started out building these sort of epic narrative experiences with the gallery, and you talked about deciding, we're going to break it up into different episodes. You released episode 1 and episode 2. And, the VR market was changing over the course of that. So the main thing that I'm interested in is, before Pistol Whip's conception as an idea, where was the studio at? Like, did you come up with it after the release of the gallery episode 2?
It was 6 months after episode 2. What year did we release the gallery episode 2?
Episode 2 was 2018, I believe. Oh, actually, it was 2017. It was 2017, Dan, because we worked on.
Yeah, no, because we did Hand Labs.
Yeah, and we did the other thing before that as well. Yeah.
Yeah, so after episode 2, the plan was to go right into episode 3, but I guess sales weren't good enough. So we ended up taking Valve hired us to work on Hand Labs, so we did that, and then we became a game trailer studio for 3 weeks, where we made a trailer for a game we really wanted to make. Greatest trailer ever made, by the way.
Yeah, really fun project. I hope we get to release it at some point, because it was a really fun project.
It's such a good trailer. We actually have a demo for that game that's really fun too. But well, you might see it later in the future.
Oh my goodness, such teasers, such teasers for us.
And for when we started, the idea of Pistol Whip came along. We had a full studio meeting, and we're just kind of trying to like throw out ideas of what we can do, what we can make quickly that would be fun and sticky, and we somehow got to the idea of a shooting rhythm game. And then that same day, Cam, our lead gameplay designer, went downstairs and made this demo where he has music and you have to shoot the blocks on the beat, and we all went downstairs and played it, and it was we could tell right away that like there's something there. So it's basically one day of ideation to little demo, and then we that's the direction we went.
So did that John Wick element sort of come in after you played it initially, and you're like, oh wow, these moves make me feel this way?
Yeah. Like once we started using just one controller, you just felt cool while you were playing. Mm-hmm. And I think John Wick just came out at that point, and we're like, oh, I feel like I'm John Wick. It's so cool. And then we just kind of like ran with that.
Yeah, I think the second one, it just came out. I think one of the things to think about there too is when we were just first ideating it, I think John Wick came up really early on, because when we landed on the rhythm shooting thing, which was basically an amalgamation of what you'd expect, which is like Super Hot and Beat Saber, we're looking at what was really working in the VR space. Those two games were specifically working. And then we looked at why they were specifically working. And, it's not just they're good games, which they are, but they're very easy to pick up and play, right? They're very low scope in terms of their art design. So they're quicker to build that way, and then very physical spatially, right? Super Hot's all about moving around in your space. Beat Saber's about moving your arms around, and we just wanted to combine that physicality with that shooting gameplay with the rhythm gameplay. And, we started talking really early on about Baby Driver. Like in that first meeting, we talked about Baby Driver. And then we landed on John Wick and thinking about movie trailers and how, bullets line up to the gunshots line up to the music in those movie trailers. And then specifically that John Wick scene where he's in the club and he's doing exactly that. We threw up that clip on the TV and we all watched that and we were like, yeah, this is kind of the feeling we want to get to. And then, when we started building Pistol Whip, then we built towards that feeling. We found where that feeling was coming from, which was a lot of it's in dodging, but also a lot of it is in how you weapon handle. So really early on, again, like Dan mentioned, like as soon as we had that first prototype, we kind of knew we had something. There were some differences in that first prototype. Like we had a more Audica style feeling in that first prototype where you have to shoot on a specific beat. And we realized that was really restricting and wasn't really lending itself to the John Wick feeling. So we stripped that out. And then we added an auto aim, which really helped to the John Wick feeling, because, how casually and how tactfully he can take out those targets, right? And so when you can then casually feel like this action hero, I think that really contributes to the feeling. And so that John Wick feeling was there right from the very beginning, and we built towards it, whenever we found it. In gameplay.
So you had this really strong vision that sort of everyone on the team could latch onto, and sort of in terms of how should this game make me feel. And then it sounds like you looked very analytically at both other games and, Beat Saber and Super Hot, and sort of kinesthetically what works here.
Audica, stuff like that.
Well, Audica didn't even exist at that point. We were coming up with Pistol Whip before Audica even released. It was 3 months after we were building Pistol Whip when Audica released their first trailer, and we were like, well, I guess we're somewhat on the right track. And we kind of knew then too, because Audica again had that kind of forced, you have to shoot on this beat feeling to it. We were like, okay, Harmonix, great team. They're doing really interesting stuff with Audica. This is a completely different game than Pistol Whip. Right, Pistol Whip is all about this free-form on rails experience where it's cinematic, right? And Audica was just kind of like a rhythm game. You're in an ethereal space and you're shooting targets, and so we knew like when we saw that first trailer for Audica, we were like, okay, clearly this is an interesting idea, but we've got such a different direction here. It never really posed us any sort of trouble. I don't even now consider us really direct competitors to Audica. Just because, again, the gameplay is just significantly different.
Mm-hmm.
Right, yeah. And I think it's actually really cool that you mentioned adding in the aim assist, like soon after the initial demo, so that people got the feeling of being that tactical hitman. Mm-hmm. You guys ended up making it a modifier to turn that off. The modifier to turn off the aim assist, did that come internally, or did like players ask for that at some point?
No, that was internally right away. Or maybe not right away, but I think a few months before release, we turned it off, and it just totally changed up gameplay, and we thought we needed to put that in there just because we know there's gonna, on day one, there's gonna be people who just ace the game with auto aim, so they're gonna need that next step, which it's basically our expert mode.
Okay, so presenting mutators for the hardcore of the hardcore.
Yeah.
Right off the bat.
So I'm curious, when you were initially sort of trying to figure out what motions fit this vision for the game, how many people were working on it at that time? Was it like a small team internally or the whole studio?
It was the whole studio, but it was a pretty small team still.
So how many people was it at the time?
Ooh, 10 or 12?
12
yeah.
at the start of Pistol Whip, yeah.
Yeah.
But that wasn't all production. That was like the whole team. So.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that was through the Gallery episode 2 as well, and Hand Lab. That was, you were all like 10 to 12.
Yeah.
We went a little bit higher for EP2.
Yeah, I think we're up to like 18 or 20.
I think
EP2.
19 on the whole team and 17 on production, I think it was, something like that.
Yeah. Yeah, that's including like management and stuff.
Yeah, exactly. And then we shrunk back down again for Hand Lab. And then once Pistol Whip released and we saw some success there, then we grew back up again.
So it sounds like, to put it bluntly, it was like hard times for the studio, where it's like, oh, we're not, episode 2 didn't perform as well. What do we do? Was there any sense when Pistol Whip started picking up and everyone was excited about it? Was there anyone who was like, but this isn't the Gallery, we're compromising on this like epic narrative vision? Or was everyone like, wow, this is really fun? I had joined the studio for the Gallery in a lot of ways, right? I came from a writing background. I love adventure games. I love puzzle adventure games. The Gallery was like the perfect thing for me and exactly what I wanted to be working on. So when we pivoted from the Gallery to Pistol Whip, I was like, it's sad to like not continue to have this really big narrative scope. But for me personally, then yeah, Pistol Whip was just so compelling, and I'm also a rhythm game fan in the first place, and I like John Wick, so I totally bought into Pistol Whip, and I love Pistol Whip to date. And I think for the most part, everyone was pretty excited about Pistol Whip. I don't think like anyone like left the team because it was like, I want to work on the Gallery or anything like that. And I've said this before in other interviews, and maybe the money doesn't agree with me, but I'd still love to go back to the Gallery if ever possible, because yeah, that's such a compelling format, and we have a really cool story there, and I'd love to wrap that up, and the scope of it too, right, was really interesting when you think about this kind of big linear adventure in the Gallery compared to these smaller encounters that you get with Pistol Whip. But we did the action packs too, so we got to get some of our narrative chops back into the game. I mean, that's something that really shows, I think, in the last 2 updates, the Pistol Whip, where you're bringing in that ability to world build and create this like compelling narrative, and I think it shows that you guys are really interested in creating narratives in VR.
Yeah, I'm kind of curious to know, like, was there any one person that sort of pushed to have these like stories added into Pistol Whip, or was it like a desire of the entire team that like, hey, we want to weave some sort of like narrative carrot in front of you to pull you through each level?
Yeah, I think it sort of developed over time, because like our team is so good at narrative, so in my opinion, it was an inevitability that we were gonna do some sort of narrative thing. As far as one person kind of pushing it, I think our project lead Joel Green kind of pushed for that, and we are all super excited about it because like, we love doing narrative stuff, so why not? And it worked out really well, so.
It was interesting to see how the scope of the cinematic narrative side of things really kind of escalated too over time. When Joel was first pitching the action packs, then it was pretty light on narrative. And as we built our team, and I moved into this kind of designer role, and I was writing a bit more and really kind of pushing for bringing back those chops. Dan does great cinematics as well. Bringing back those chops that we had with the Gallery and really utilizing the full team strengths was really important. And yeah, Joel definitely pushed that really, really hard as audio designer as well. So I'm sure he had a lot of fun doing voiceover work and sound effects and stuff like that.
Yeah, and I think originally the scope was we were gonna have interstitials, or I guess cinematics in between each level, but they were only gonna be like one single panel with just voiceover, and then they ended up being multiple panels that with depth and animation, and we had this idea, and we just expanded it a ton, and it turned out really, really well. And they're super fun to make too.
That's a pretty rare thing, is getting to expand your scope rather than cut it over the course of development.
I mean, we definitely cut a lot of scope, but we expanded a ton before we cut.
It seems like you guys are really adamant about pursuing, what is working in the game that we have in front of us right now, what's making this fun, and let's focus on that.
Yes, and we also are really interested in continuing to allow new ways to play as well. That was one of our core pillars from day one, was allowing these multiple ways to top scores, or multiple ways to play. And so we launched with the set of modifiers, and every single update we've added more and more modifiers, and we've got more modifiers to come. And that's really about not just kind of sitting on our hands and delivering the same pistol whip experience, but coming up with really kind of a bold new idea, which was the action packs. And then also just continuing to allow things like the concierge, or the style system, which kind of blew up the game and turned it into a sandbox game. And the more modifiers we can add in too, then it's not just the same pistol whip experience. You actually kind of get a whole bunch of experiences all underneath the pistol whip label, which is really interesting. We can start pushing things more towards rhythm game, more towards action game, so on and so forth.
Now, was this all sort of in the cards from day one of launch, or was I imagine the success of the game was kind of a surprise. I think the popularity of the Quest took everyone by surprise. So, did you have in mind that you wanted to do a bunch of DLC for Pistol Whip, or did the opportunity just fall in your lap and you ran with it?
When we launched Pistol Whip, we didn't really have a solid plan of what we wanted to do, but after launch day, we're like, oh, this game's gonna be super popular. Everyone loves it already. So we kind of started thinking of what we can do next, and we started putting out the levels every month and a half or so. And then I think right before our last level is when we came up with the action pack idea.
And concierge at the same time.
And concierge, yeah.
So you guys saw the success of the launch of Pistol Whip, and then from there said, let's keep nurturing this through the one level every 1 to 2 months, which as a player who is playing Pistol Whip, dev and player who was playing Pistol Whip since launch, I was seeing those new levels drop, and I was thinking holy shit, free new levels and pretty frequent, and then I'm given the glare over to Asgard's Wrath and any of the other big stuff, big meaning tons and tons of money pumped into it by Zuck and company.
Yeah.
But those games are often they drop and then they don't get sustained support. But here we have Pistol Whip giving sustained support and ultimately leading to these going from individual levels to bundles of levels, which I believe is what you're referring to when you say action packs.
That's right.
And that's a great evolution of the idea. The other thing I kind of wanted to hone in on with that is that you guys, Cloudheads, released all those tracks. It started at, I believe, 10 tracks, and then went up to 18 more tracks on top of that, so around 28 tracks. And for the most part, all of those were free up until, I believe, shortly after Smoke and Thunder, the game went up by a couple of dollars. But I guess I kind of would like to get your feeling as two internal developers, with that long tail of putting out free content and then charging more. Do you guys have any feelings about that? Either as players or as devs, do you care to see a game go up in value, even though it's been given more content over the course of life, where we often are seeing, these bigger budget games coming out and then using microtransactions or whatever to keep the life of the game continuing?
I like the raising the price after the fact more than DLC personally, because one of the things we didn't want to do is split up our player base, because we're adding all these modifiers and all these new levels, and if we did DLC, some people wouldn't buy them by the action packs, and they wouldn't get these new modifiers, and then it would just split up everything.
Right, that's a major problem that like the Call of Duty player base would often run
exactly.
into.
Yeah. So by raising the price afterwards, it kind of rewards the people who supported us at the beginning and bought the game early, and also doesn't alienate them as well, right?
Right.
I think we followed pretty closely to the early access formula, right? We didn't launch in early access, but we had a small game at launch. We continued building it for a year, 2 years. Released a ton of new content, changed up the shape of the game, gave it a facelift, did a whole bunch of stuff, and then said, okay, this is maybe what an early access game might call a 1.0 release. Here's now the time that we should raise the price.
I'm definitely on the side of agreeing with y'all, and was this successful enough to maybe think about it for other titles moving forward?
Pretty hard to say. Because it's kind of an early access formula without releasing early access. Maybe this says to us, maybe next time we should do an early access and do it that way instead. But I think clearly this format of like small sticky gameplay loop with ongoing live support does make sense.
Post-launch, like we mentioned, a ton of levels came out. The narrative side of Cloudhead made its way in the Pistol Whip. I'm wondering if the community had any strong influence, like the player base reaction to the game or certain elements of the game. Did that community feedback or input play any role whatsoever in like that 1 year future of Pistol Whip after launch?
Yeah, there's a couple things that came up. The funny thing is that a lot of the feedback we got, especially over the first year, was very, very similar to the first round of feedback that we received during playtests, initial playtests. Basically, we had like 90% of our players in our playtest. We did like a round of 100 people before the launch of the game. And about 95% of those people just like loved the game. And then there was about 10% of the people who just kind of didn't really click with it, which seemed totally fine. Again, Pistol Whip is not a traditional rhythm game. You don't shoot on the beat. You shoot on any beat. And that was really kind of complicated for a lot of people because it relies less on, okay, here's your metronome, here's your exact timing, just follow the instructions. It's more freeform in terms of, okay, find your internal rhythm and then play to that. And some people just don't have internal rhythm. So we started things like the metronome haptics that gives you a haptic vibration for what we consider to be the beat of the song. And then as the game grew, we started adding things like no beat sections, which are kind of like the solo sections in Rock Band, where instead of being scored for your individual beats, you just kind of get to do whatever you want, and you completely freeform in any rhythm you want, and you get all your points, and it's totally fine. So kind of stripping away some of the preconceptions of rhythm games. When we were first building the game, we had a song list instead of a quote-unquote scene list. It was, again, a very traditional rhythm game thing. You just have your list of songs, you pick a song, you play a song. And so we said, okay, let's pull it back a little bit. It's not quite a rhythm game. These are not songs, these are scenes that you're playing, right? They're like levels that you're playing. And so we put down these scene posters, and then people had less preconceptions about what the rhythm game was, and they entered it more like an action game. And then they were more comfortable just like kind of surviving as it goes, rather than trying to hit to the rhythm right away.
It's interesting that taking account of the feedback during playtests, during development, trying to make the decision between, do we alter player expectations by, turning it from a song list to a scene list, or do we change the game to match the player expectations? And of course, once it's out, it's people are going to have whatever expectations because it's already been set. Mm-hmm. But I think that's something that's pretty counterintuitive. People who aren't designers may not realize, like, you don't have to take player feedback at face value.
Yeah, totally. I mean, we would maybe end up closer to Audica had we done that, right? Because I think things like shooting on any beat was really kind of a complicated decision, and it did kind of confuse people, and especially the way we score on beat as well. The default scoring in the game is that if you are on beat, you just get full points. There's no like, oh, you were slightly off beat, so you get slightly less points for the beat. It's just a complete full stop on beat, off beat, and things like that were really complicated. And we made those decisions despite playtest feedback that were confused about that, specifically because we wanted to allow this really freeform gameplay. very famously, our tutorial, or infamously maybe, our tutorial has no discussion at all about the rhythm or how to score on beat or anything like that. We don't even mention it in our tutorial. Our tutorial is focused entirely on shooting, reloading, dodging, and surviving. Just staying alive in the first place before you even think about rhythm. And so a lot of the community feedback, especially over time, has been like, okay, let's start seeing more of those rhythm game elements come into the game. And so right now we're working on some additional documentation in the game to kind of explain a little bit more how the rhythm side of it goes. So people kind of understand a bit more how it is a rhythm game. We're also considering modifiers that do the same thing, that maybe make it a little bit more of a rhythm game. I think there's been some really interesting community feedback there in terms of where it falls on the line of, is this a rhythm game, is this not a rhythm game, and then things that we can do to support both those player types, because we want to be the sandbox freeform game.
So we've talked a lot about Pistol Whip in general. We've talked a lot about Cloudhead Games. Now I want to get into the nitty gritty of Pistol Whip and ask a bunch of questions that have been eating at me. I got lots of questions, but I want to start with something a little easy and ask you both if you can share a time where you had some sort of strong emotional reaction to Pistol Whip, or like working on Pistol Whip.
Well, for me, it was when we were working on 2089, the first action pack. I was testing some bug that was in the first level, and I jumped in and I ended up playing through the whole action pack without even remembering what I was supposed to be doing, and just playing the whole thing for like half an hour and being like, oh wow, that was amazing, that was so much fun. And I think that was the first time that like I knew like this action pack was like awesome and a really good idea. But for me, that was one of the coolest moments during production of Pistol Whip.
Like what distracted you from finding your bug? Was it the narrative? Was it the gameplay? Something else?
I think it was a combination of everything, right? Like the design of all the levels was super fun. That was right around the time where I was starting to get the cinematics animated and standing up, so they were starting to get like super engaging. Yeah, it was definitely a combination of everyone's work into this half an hour experience that
just blew your mind away.
Yeah, it blew my mind. Felt good. It was just like really nice to see everyone's work combined into this one thing.
Mm-hmm.
That's awesome. I love that feeling. How about you, Antony?
The first time I got to the credits of 2089 and being like, we just made like a gallery level immersive experience in a shooting rhythm game. It resonated with me in such a way, it gave me the shivers. I'm like, wow, this was like fun and nostalgic and unique, and like we'd actually like done something super, super interesting, and I was super proud of it. But other than that, the first time I did a song swap and I muted the game and I played some Taylor Swift, and I was like, how am I playing Taylor Swift to Pistol Whip right now? And it's lining up and I'm having a blast. It really kind of blew my mind. Once again, like this game, because it's so freeform, you can kind of do anything with it. And so realizing that like, okay, we have these great levels designed, and these levels are actually multi-purpose because they can be used with other songs with similar BPMs or similar rhythms. And just by the nature of music theory, things like choruses and pre-choruses and hooks, they all come around the same place. And again, if the BPM is similar, then you're getting really similar dodging experiences, you're getting really similar shooting experiences. And so like just having like a random song that I know and I'm familiar with line up, getting my internal rhythm, and then being like, okay, this isn't just a hardcore EDM game. This is like, any music works here. Any music you want works in these levels. So I'm personally really excited for like custom levels to come online.
Yeah, I was
really
just about to ask more about the song swapping thing, but now I get it. That sounds amazing. If I ever get the opportunity to play Nuck If You Buck while going down a Pistol Whip alley, it's going to be over. Get the brawler modifier. Like, it's on. My walls are breaking. My quest is going to crack.
Yeah. Like sometimes modifiers coming online really like just like blow my mind, because I'm like, a new modifier comes online and then I'm playing the game an entirely different way, and I'm like, we really nailed that idea that like you can kind of play this game so many different ways. The first time Dan mentioned, the first time we played with Deadeye, it's like, wait a second, all you have to do is turn off aim assist and the game feels completely different. First time we added Vengeance, stuff like that. We've got a new
Bullet Hell came online. It was like, whoo.
Bullet Hell is super interesting. Yeah, like realizing that Pistol was also a fitness game. That was really compelling. There's some new mods that we're working on right now that I'm super excited to get into people's hands, because one of the things that Concierge allows is us specifically to change scoring methods, right? Because each style has its own leaderboards. Each style can be scored in its own way. So now modifiers can actually affect scoring in a different way. And so remember we were talking earlier about how beat currently is only an on-off, a binary, right? So you either hit the beat or you don't hit the beat. But maybe there's a modifier where there's a gradient there and you can actually play it more like a traditional rhythm game. Or maybe fuck the beat and you just want to play a shooting game, and now there's a modifier that lets you play like a straight-up shooting game with no rhythm at all.
Has there been a moment where you're like, oh, maybe this is a more compelling experience than base pistol whip, and like this is what it, quote, should be?
Not for me, because anything on top just adds a level of complexity that takes away the really accessible, pure fun, monkey brain activity that is pistol whip. Even going dual wield, I'm like, I don't think I would ever make dual wield the default over single pistol for pistol whip. Because you're starting to think about two different directions. You're thinking about two different hands, reloading asynchronously. It's just so much more mental load. Anytime you add a modifier or another weapon or anything like that. I think the base pistol whip experience was really smartly landed on. And I don't think I would replace that base pistol whip experience with anything else in order to maintain the accessibility and the pure like fun of it without like overloading players.
Yeah, like the base pistol whip is still my most preferred way to play. Like Lance said, it makes my lizard brain happy. The fun thing about modifiers is like someone in the studio will be like, yeah, I just played this level with Bullet Hell and Headhunter and all that, so you guys should try it and be my score. So that's always super fun to like when you play a level with just base pistol whip and then someone switches it up and it totally changes. It's super fun. But yeah, base pistol whip is still my preferred way to play.
That's interesting, 'cause Smoke and Thunder, you get 2 guns by default.
Yep.
How did you come around to that decision of like, well, base pistol whip is great, but let's depart from that for this whole expansion?
Yeah, I mean, it kind of comes back to the community question early on. Like, we had a lot of people at launch be like, oh, I want to turn off aim assist. And so we had something like Deadeye, and lots of people at launch being like, oh, I actually want 2 controllers. And so we had dual wield in that launch. But there were still lots of people that like weren't finding those settings or weren't necessarily like realizing how open pistol whip was or anything like that. And so I think a big part of the decision to go dual wield for Smoke and Thunder was like accounting for that and being like, okay, hey people, look, pistol whip can be played with 2 guns. It's super fun with 2 guns. It's a whole new experience with 2 guns. And let's see how this changes level design. Let's see, what kind of things we can come up with, how we can, really encourage 2 guns rather than just having the second gun being just kind of some help or whatever. Like you run out of ammo and you're like, oh, I need another bullet. And so like there's another gun or whatever. But like actually making meaningful gameplay out of 2 weapons by encouraging players to switch weapons or to alternate ammos or alternate ammo in each weapon or change the side of the body that they're aiming, right? So like crossing their arms, I think was a really interesting thing to try to encourage in Smoke and Thunder. Placing enemies on the right hand side, but you have no ammo in your right hand weapon, so you have to use your left hand weapon and then shoot those enemies, and then now there's enemies on the left, so you got to reload your right hand and go with your right hand over your left arm and so on and so forth, and coming up with all those moments to prove out dual wield was really interesting.
Yeah, it was definitely a fun design challenge to start making these 5 pistol whip levels with dual wield in mind, other than instead of base pistol whip. I think the original reason why we went with dual wields was we knew we wanted to do a cowboy game, and we wanted to do the revolver gun. So we wanted to do 2 different guns in each hand, and for whatever reason that didn't work out. But we still kept with the dual wield gameplay for that action pack, which ended up being super fun.
How has the understanding of pistol whip, quote unquote, like the gameplay experience, the possibilities without, cognitively overloading anyone, how did even the thought process of like we could play with X and Y and Z, like did that evolve? And if so, how did it evolve after like Pistol Whip launched?
Yeah. Is there anything that now you're thinking about that when you were initially developing it wouldn't have even crossed your mind, or you wouldn't have thought was feasible in the game?
We had such a really strong set of core pillars from the very, very beginning, and we've always stuck to those pillars. And so it was fairly easy almost every single time to look at an idea and then say, does this idea make sense for Pistol Whip? Does it fit these pillars? And then cut it if necessary. One of the things that kind of comes to mind there really easily is two-handed reload, manual reload. Right? So in Pistol Whip, then we take the arcade thing where you like shoot off screen to reload, and we just say, point down to reload. But we did experiment with some things where it's like, okay, there's maybe a world where two-handed reload makes sense because it's it's cool and tactile and it gives you that John Wick physicality. But the mental load just was too much. That didn't make sense. However, to answer the question, I guess, is like, as Pistol Whip has evolved, and especially as the concierge came online, the concierge again opens so many new things because you can score differently and you can say, okay, this is a sandbox now, and you can really ramp up the difficulty up, both easier and harder. And so like something like even threatless, which is like enemies don't even shoot, that kind of changes things up quite a bit. And we didn't really expect something like that to work maybe in the first version of Pistol Whip, because we thought of Pistol Whip as a bullet hell. So like taking the bullet hell out of the bullet hell game is like, what are we doing? Power-ups is another thing we've talked about. A kind of an old school arcade idea of like, okay, like maybe there's power-ups throughout the scene and you have to shoot them or hit them, and then you change weapons mid-scene and like stuff like that, where it's just like, again, just kind of really overcomplicating things. Even though it seems like, okay, that fits the arcade style, too much mental load overcomplicates things. And like you said, I think it's really important, especially for new players to Pistol Whip, to focus on survival first before adding in, more complex things like rhythm. And
the team was basically branching out in the areas that they sort of knew or had strengths in, and that's why we saw narrative and like some modifiers come in, but didn't want to overwhelm the player with any of these steps. So that's why we see things go to the wayside, like more complex reloading, or even some sort of extra complexification of just the moment-to-moment gameplay, because if I have to do anything more complex than throw my arm up or down to reload, I now can't focus on the fact that I'm moving, on the fact that bullets might be coming towards me, which ultimately results in a less pleasurable play experience, which none of us want.
Totally.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
Is there anything that you originally set aside as like, this is not going to work, and now you're like, yeah, let's put it in?
Well, the heat seeker weapons, the boomsticks, we worked on those for months trying to make those fun.
Yeah, we almost cut the boomsticks. We almost
cut the boomsticks. Yeah. And then they were just getting so complicated that we just brought them back down to 2 shots. The bullets are explosive, and you can just reload normally, and it just turned out super super fun, super sticky.
I'm curious to know, because you mentioned, it sounds like the boomsticks became like a very controversial thing. Like, why was there friction there, at least before simplifying it? Like, where was the boomstick going that didn't gel well with the rest of Pistol Whip?
There's a couple things. One of them is the nature of reloading, I think. So again, in Pistol Whip, you it's really simple. You just kind of point down to reload. But with the boomsticks, you only have 2 ammo per weapon. And so if you're not really efficient with your ammo, they are explosive rounds, so you can get lots of enemies with a single round. But if you're not really efficient with your ammo, then you will end up actually reloading quite a bit. And maybe that causes strain, and maybe that's uncomfortable, and maybe that's, not the cool action hero experience that people are really looking for. So it was really hard to kind of come up with the balance for the boomsticks, figuring out the right ammo capacity for the boomsticks, figuring out the right, blast radius, that kind of thing. Just tuning the actual mechanics of the boomstick, to account for the idea that, okay, we're maintaining this type of reload system, just balancing in general. So, you can reload instantly. So like, does 2 ammo even make a difference? And so you have to kind of design enemy placements in such a way that, yes, you are using up that ammo, and yes, you are still making people reload every now and then, but like in such a way that if they play it efficiently, then, it's not going to be uncomfortable for them. Famous controversy would be Scene 2, Not Dead Yet, Last Ride, which is the first scene with all these horses, and there's like these stampedes of horses, and you can get them all with the boomstick. But people were like, okay, you're actually maybe reloading too much. Maybe I'd actually prefer revolvers here. And we said, okay, well, I think the intended gameplay there is the really fun exploding all the horses with the boomsticks. But of course we have the style system now, so you can play that scene with revolvers if you prefer, and then you're not reloading as much. Finding those kinds of balances was really interesting with the boomstick specifically.
One thing that I was thinking of as you guys are talking about all this stuff is it sounds like you're very cognizant about like mental load for the player, or like cognitive load, where, introducing more complex reloads or gun in 2 hands takes up a certain amount of attention for the player. And so maybe you have to reduce complexity somewhere else. I just think that's interesting. I don't know if that's a question.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of that came from our background on the gallery too, right? Where that's a puzzle game in the first time you've ever been fully immersed in a VR adventure where you can like go anywhere and touch everything. And we found that, players would get stuck even on the very first puzzle, because there's just so much stuff to do. And it's like, there's so much cognitive load, things to remember, places to look at, things to put together. So we were really cognizant of that coming out of something like a puzzle adventure game, into Pistol Whip, which we knew we wanted to really be simplified and lizard brain-esque, as Dan has said.
Yeah, and we knew we were designing Pistol Whip mainly for the quest, and the quest is basically like the mobile phone of VR. So yeah, we wanted to keep it super simple. Like we wanted it to like you put on the quest, play Pistol Whip, and then you could pass your headset to your mom or your grandma, and they could just jump in, and it's basically aim and pull the trigger, and you're playing, and you know what to do.
Yeah, thinking about casual players, thinking about new players.
Yeah, it was super important to keep the gameplay super simple, and but also keep it fun while being simple.
What I've really been wanting to know for a long time, and I hope a large chunk of our audience wants to know this, is how does a new Pistol Whip scene get made? It's not just a song, as you mentioned. It's not just an environment. It's a whole experience. Like, many parts come together to form a scene, and I imagine you two will be the perfect people to talk about it. And in talking about it, you can tell us kind of like where you specifically come into that pipeline process of like making these levels, and maybe what you would personally be doing on them.
Yeah, I mean, obviously the first step is finding the song, and that's quite the process.
How does finding a song come about?
During production, we could have done a better job, but we really just opened up to the studio. Basically, everyone just threw their opinions in. We have hundreds of songs that we've gone through. So for the first 10 songs, we knew we wanted to kind of go like the classic rhythm game route and just do like electronic music. So we basically focused on that, and I'm pretty sure we landed on Cannamlin was our main production studio that we got all our songs from. So we kind of had that library to choose from.
So you're not just picking any song, right? You got to think about licensing and rights and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, exactly. And fortunately for us, Cannamlin was like super good to work with. Like those guys are awesome. They didn't really give us any headaches on that front. But yeah, once we got our songs, it's basically, we knew we wanted these levels to be like movie trailers, like action movie trailers. So basically the whole team would meet and we'd listen to the song kind of like come up with a theme for the track. We'd look at the exciting parts of the song and figure out what kind of set pieces we want there. And once we have that all figured out, then the designer on that song would take it and beat map it. And once it's beat mapped, all the enemies would come in, but they just like run into right in the middle. At that point, we'd have to get all the. Did we have animations at the beginning, or did we just
not at the very beginning. At the very
in?
beginning, then everyone was just kind of running into the middle, and then we added the animations, and we started being able to place them in different places. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, at the beginning we just had cubes.
Yeah, there was the cubes too before there was even humanoids. That's right.
Yeah. So we had cubes coming in.
So would these cubes always walk to the center path, at least in the early stages? Were they always like, the melee guys who walk into the track, or were you able to spawn these cubes off in the distance as if they were dudes that were going to shoot at you?
The first iteration was they were rectangles that started small and got bigger, and then once they got to their biggest states, that was the beat you had to shoot them on to get full points.
Okay.
The more Audica style from the very beginning.
The more Audica style. Like, obviously you could shoot them earlier and they'd still, if you shot them on a beat, you'd still get full points. But once they reach that full size, that would be their quote unquote action point where they'd shoot at you.
Oh, okay, yeah.
So once it's beat mapped, it just like you like auto generate a set of enemy spawns, or are you going in and you're like, all right, on this beat I want to spawn 5 guys. So is it more like you go in blank slate, or you're making adjustments from a sort of initial generation?
Early on, we didn't have a library of enemy sequences, so it'd be like Antony would beat map a level, then he'd come to me and be like, Dan, I want this enemy to run out and stop, and while he's running out, I want him to shoot twice, and then he stops, and then his action point is there, and then I want him to like duck or whatever. So I would create these enemy sequences, which eventually became a library of enemy sequences that the designers just can use. So like at the beginning, those first 10 songs, it took a long time to create levels just because we didn't have that library of enemy sequences. But for example, now we can create a level super quickly just because we can beat map quickly, and then we have that library of enemy sequences, so we know what they're gonna do, and we don't need to like create every single movement for enemies now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we have like the tools just to bang out levels for sure. Yeah.
So I was just curious, when you guys are talking about the theming, is the theming like the name of a movie and like an image, or is it like a 1-page document? Like how in depth is that? Is
it potentially like a kinesthetic action, like the old boy scene where he's taking the hammer down the hallway?
Yeah, there's kind of it kind of revolves a lot around the music. So I guess it depended. It was different between doing the initial set list versus doing the action packs, because with the action packs, then we storyboarded before we had the music. And then we found music that fit the theme and the tone that we wanted to hit for each specific scene of the story. But with the original set list, then we grabbed the music, and then from there we were like, okay, what does this evoke for us? And so for our prototypical scene, Black Magic, then we listened to it and we heard like these really interesting strings and these interesting drums and some horns, and we were like, this kind of has this Chinatown feeling to it. So then once we had Chinatown, then we knew that we had like, these close quarter engagements that were down like this tight alleyway. And then from there, it's like, okay, once the music gets a bit louder and, we approach the drop, it's like, okay, let's start thinking about opening up that space. So now you're like approaching a warehouse and maybe there's some cars on the side. And then, there's this big set piece with a bunch of enemies. And then, you go into the warehouse, and then maybe, when we're thinking about these storyboards too, we're not thinking about like a direct progression through like a linear space. We're really thinking thematically. So, you enter this warehouse thing, but now you're like in a nightclub, and then you're at the back of the nightclub, you're back in the warehouse, and then out of the warehouse, you're back into the Chinatown. And it's like these really kind of surreal spaces kind of merge together to give like a feeling, rather than this really specific, like linear experience. And So yeah, depending on what we're working on, then the storyboard could be as simple as like, okay, looking at the waveform and then saying, okay, the music is quiet here, so maybe there's close encounters here. Music gets louder here, so maybe there's bigger, long range, wide exchanges there. Compared to something like maybe the campaigns where we're like, okay, our set pieces are more animatic rather than enemy driven, right? Once we added more animations and more animations, so we knew like at the end of the scene we want to like overwhelm the player, so that's a really specific set piece. Or with 2089, it was interesting. We knew we wanted to do a no melee scene for scene 2, which turned out to be cage fight. So that's like its whole thing, and then we build the scene around that as the theme, as this no ammo theme. And so like you're in this derelict hospital and you've got no ammo and you're fighting your way through, and so on and so forth.
Now this is probably pretty iterative, right? Like what does the process look like in terms of, getting it fleshed out a first pass and then playtesting it internally, externally, and making changes based on feedback?
Yeah, I'll talk about like the current process, the most modern process. So basically, the designers will beat map a level and then place all the enemies. And we normally start on hard first, and then we kind of strip down components to go from hard to normal to easy. So we kind of take this hard level that's like as hard as we can make it, so we can strip it down later on if we need to make it a bit easier. So we make the level how we want to make it, and then we throw it past the team and the designers and the design lead, and we get some playtesting feedback. And then we go in and we make those changes, and then we start saying, okay, once we're more comfortable with how we are with hard, so changes could be things like, okay, this enemy is hard to see, right? So we got to move this enemy closer in FOV, or this enemy shoots at an unfair time, so we have to adjust their enemy sequence, or maybe this part just isn't fun, so it needs more to it, that kind of thing. And then once we're comfortable with hard, we kind of go on to normal and easy, and start stripping out components. So that's things like lowering enemy density. It's things like changing obstacles to be more generous, so like wider dodges, higher ducking obstacles, that kind of thing. And then also just enemy shot timings in general, so enemies will shoot less frequently, or not at all, that kind of thing.
And we'll like replace like four shot enemies with 2-shot enemies or 1-shot enemies.
Totally, armor types as well is a great point. And then once we've got those normal easy, that's close to where the rest of the team plays is normal easy. We've got lots of designers who obviously play on hard, but like management or some of the artists, maybe they play on normal or easy. And so then we get the normal easy playtest feedback, and then again more iteration, fixing bugs or again tuning difficulty, making things a bit more exciting on normal or a bit easier on easy, so on and so forth. And then at that point, once the design is locked in, we pass it over to the artists, and the artists will start filling out the scene, and then we can again iterate based on what the artists do to make, maybe the artist added a wall here, then now someone's not visible, so you have to move them to make them more visible, or maybe the artist adjusts the wall or whatever. And then again, more iteration through the art phase as well, and then more playtesting, and then more iteration, and then we ship it.
And going back to Antony's point about fist fight, I think cage fight had the most iterations of any level we've worked on, just because it was so hard, because it was the first level that we couldn't shoot. Yeah, I remember the first time I played it, my legs gave out on me just because I was squatting so much. So we're like, Andy, just make it a little bit easier, And that was a really fun level to play test, just because it went through so many iterations and eventually turned out to be one of the most fun levels in Pistol Whip.
I kind of have, I guess, a related question, although I hadn't thought about this up until this moment. Y'all have a super active game and you test it like wherever you're working. Are there any pro tips to avoiding a super wet face mask after running your level a couple times? Or do you all just sort of deal with the fact that like testing your work means you're gonna sweat a couple of rounds.
We all have the VR cover on our indexes.
Ah, smart. Yep.
And then I think we all have multiple different
the face
plates that you can swap out.
Yep.
But I think we've all gotten to the point where, well, for me personally, like I've gotten to the point where I'm good enough to touch level. I don't need to move that much. I'm not like drenched.
Yeah, we're pretty efficient with our movements for sure.
Yeah, definitely at the beginning when we were making those first 10 levels and we're doing whole studio playtests, it would get pretty gross.
Right.
Oh yeah.
We would all be using one index and it'd be
oh goodness.
It would get very moist. Yeah.
Oh, wow, that's like
get close
so
to your teammates
now.
on a biological level.
Yeah.
Something neat that we touched on was the difficulty of the boomsticks, getting them kind of into the game or proving them out. I'm wondering, was that the most difficult feature to get into the game, or was there something else that we're just totally overlooking that was the biggest hurdle?
Yeah, I mean, both the weapons, the boomstick and the burst fire, were kind of like that. The burst fire also went through a bunch of iteration. We tried a bunch of different variations, 2 round burst, 3 round burst, 4 round burst, fully auto. We tried a bunch of stuff. We tried a dumb burst as well. In the game we have the smart burst. So if you you hold the trigger, then it'll automatically fire at targets, whereas the dumb burst would just automatically fire its burst. I think even more than the boomstick had some interesting design knock-ons, again, in terms of managing ammo and things like that. But maybe one of the hardest mechanics would have been the burst fire that Cam worked on. Just really nailing exactly how that gun felt and what exactly it did. And it was tough for us as designers too, because it took a certain amount of time to come online, and we're trying to build these levels for it, and we're just kind of imagining what it's going to be like when it's done, when we're building these levels. But it all came together, and Burst Fire turned out pretty awesome too. So
I have a related question, which is we've covered a number of things that are sort of in the weeds. Talked about Vection portals and talked about how the scoring is not binary on beat off beat, but a gradient. Is there something that you think a lot of people overlook in the game's design that actually has huge consequences for how the game feels?
For me, I think this almost entirely relates to rhythm. Basically all the negative reviews that I still see these days are people that are I don't connect with the rhythm, I don't understand how this is a rhythm game, so on and so forth. Or they make the claim that this was a bullet hell game before it was a rhythm game, and it's no, we've been building this as a rhythm game from day one, and all of our mechanics support that, and just because it's not a traditional rhythm game doesn't mean there's not rhythm components, and you don't need rhythm, and so on and so forth. And so there's a lot of stuff under the hood to make the rhythm game side of things feel better. That people, because we don't talk about them in the tutorial, I think people are less aware of and are maybe kind of hidden features. One of them being what I mentioned earlier, the no beat sequences. So those are sequences where we just ignore the beat scoring, and let you just kind of shoot freeform, when the beat of the music is not clear specifically. And the metronome haptics is another good example. But there's also rapid fire scoring, which is really interesting. Rapid fire scoring is how we allow people to hit on eighth notes and quarter notes, and on some occasions even do syncopation with their firing rates, by saying, okay, the first time a shot is on beat within a window, then any subsequent shots are also considered on beat. So you can double tap on a single beat, so it would be like a quarter beat or an eighth note, and that counts as on beat because it's within the window. Some kind of tricky stuff like that.
That's really interesting.
Yeah, and people don't.
Yeah, that's a great answer.
Yeah. People don't really know about that, and but it's just one example of how we have built the game as a rhythm game from the very beginning, and try to make these affordances for people. It doesn't always work. Again, it's all about feel, right? So sometimes still in the current game, people are like, I kind of felt like that was on beat. But for the most part, I think we've done a really, really good job of saying, okay, if you have this sense of rhythm and you try to shoot to a rhythm, then for the most part, you're gonna be able to play the game quite well. Oh, and also, actually, the enemy sequences, to be honest. People are like, I don't really get how they are lining up to the beat or whatever. And literally every single enemy sequence in the entire game is 100% built around the beat. Every single enemy sequence has what's called an action point. The action point is the quote unquote the intended beat, the golden path beat. So every single enemy either shoots on beat, moves into place on beat, or spawns on beat, with no exception. So everything in the game is to the rhythm. Even if it's not quite as noticeable. There's even the flashing, to be honest. There's the flashing, the entire world pulsates to the beat. And some people just don't even notice it. It's really, really interesting, how some of these, because we don't present the game as a traditional rhythm game, and we don't like talk about all this stuff out of the gate, people just don't even notice it. You know, there's haptics, there's lighting, there's animations, there's, all this stuff, going on.
Yeah, like even the enemies like pulsate on the beat.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's a bunch of clues for the beat in there that people miss.
The beat is all around us. It's the main thing I get from that. The music is all around us.
Yeah. It's something for me that people miss it less now. But when we released the game, we had players that were complaining that like they wanted to use dual wielding and two controllers, and why isn't this in the game? And it is in the game.
Always has been.
Always has been. It was just hidden in the menu somewhere.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was one thing. It's one of the reasons why we have a UI team now, to make things easier to find.
Really famously, there's a Markiplier video. It's the most watched pistol video on YouTube, multiple million views, and he couldn't find dual wield. Very sad stuff for us.
And he was like, I wish this game had dual wield. We're like, it does.
We're like in the comments.
You're just yelling at the screen like, stop, Mr. YouTube man, you're spreading misinformation.
No.
Let's take a look at the future of Cloudhead Games. We're not talking like super far future, like 2089. We're probably talking more like, 2022, 2023.
Yeah. One of the big things is you guys have been talking about how you're spinning off this like B team, Cloudhead Labs, I think, to do more experimentation.
Yeah, Labs is interesting. Labs is not specifically a games division. Labs is kind of right now a software division, and so they're working on the co-working app right now. But beyond that team, there is, of course, the core Cloudhead team, which is not going to be working on Pistol Whip forever. And I don't know how much Dan wants to talk about this, but there are some plans for obviously our next project beyond Pistol Whip. But we are going to continue working on Pistol Whip, and we've said that, and we've got ideas again. There's more like concierge stuff we want to do in terms of how we work on styles and how we surface styles and things like that. Obviously, there's endless room for modifiers to add to the game, endless room for scenes to add to the game, and then we've got some special stuff coming up with that we're working on with the community for maybe adding more content that isn't necessarily from us.
That makes me very excited, both as a player and for y'all. Like, that sounds like it'll take a little bit off of your backs in terms of workload, but as we all know, user-generated content, UGC for short, has its own, like, barrel of spiders you gotta wade through before you get, like, the good stuff.
Yeah.
Don't ask me about that analogy, I'm an arachnophobic.
Yeah, again, nothing hard to announce there, but it's always, like, it's been part of our vision from Pistol Whip from the very beginning. Obviously, it's a kind of a core thing that people think about when they think about rhythm games. They think about opening up that kind of custom content. So it's something we've been wanting to enable for a really long time, and when we think about the future of Pistol Whip, then I think that's a clear direction.
Yeah, and as far as the future of Cloudhead Games goes, we're not exclusively a Pistol Whip studio, so we definitely have more stuff coming that's not Pistol Whip.
I mentioned earlier in this talk, we were one of the first studios in the entire world to receive the Valve Index. And that was the same for the Oculus Rift. That was the same for the HTC Vive. That was the same for the Oculus Quest. It does not end there.
Okay, so listeners, be on the lookout for the new cutting-edge headsets and Cloudhead Games to be right on top of it when it hits your store shelves. If you were to see the Pistol Whip, I don't know if I want to call it design space or maybe format is better, where it's kind of like some sort of like theming or feeling wrapped around this like short burst experience. If you were to take like that kind of core Pistol Whip and apply it to a different genre, not talking about like Cloudhead deciding this, just like you as developers, like what would you want to mash up with Pistol Whip?
Roguelite. I want to make I would love to make a Hades sort of game with the Pistol Whip engine.
For me, horror. I'd really like to do some horror. I think that would be really, really fitting. And then just like more action-packed stuff, but turning it into an adventure shooter rather than like an arcade shooter. Taking the action-packed style and like making a full-fledged game out of that format.
My last question to both of you, Antony and Dan. You as individuals, you as VR developers, you as gamers, however you want to frame it, like what interests you about the future of the VR platform?
Yeah, for me personally, it is always in narrative and those kinds of interactions. I'm always interested in new experiences that push NPC interactions, new experiences that deliver narrative in a new format. I'm always really interested in storytelling inside of VR, but not just like flat storytelling, but like immersive 3D environmental storytelling. You're in a space, you're on an adventure, you're completely immersed in a different world. The kind of stuff that we were doing with the gallery. That's the kind of stuff that really compels me about VR. I think VR has tons of applications outside of that. Like I think social is maybe one of the most important applications of VR. Things like maybe what Meta is doing with the metaverse, but what Rec Room is already doing with social and VR chat has been a huge success as well. I think those kinds of experiences are really important. But for me personally, I'm really interested in working on kind of narrative and again, like thinking about the way that you can interact with the digital world, specifically other like characters and humans and aliens and things like that, and how you can talk with them and touch them and that kind of thing.
Yeah, I'm kind of on the same wavelength as Antony there. Like I love getting lost in an experience and having that narrative focused game where you can just get lost in this other world it excites me. So that's kind of where I'd want to keep going and experience.
Thank you, Antony and Dan, so much for joining us for this very special episode of Head-Mounted Destinations. This has been a very enjoyable experience. It's been very cool talking with you both. And I guess my last question to you is just do you have anything you'd like to plug? If it's your own social media or the project you work on, your studio, anything, get it out there. Whoever listens to this show will be able to know what you're doing and they'll be able to click on it and see it. And I'm sure that'll feel cool to somebody.
Yeah, if you're interested in small teams doing cool stuff, I definitely recommend checking out the gallery. It's getting a little old there, but I think way ahead of its time in a really similar way that Alex was. Honestly, there's a lot of kind of gallery lineage inside of Alex. So if you're interested in those kinds of experiences, try those out. HandLab is also free. I had a great time working on that. That's set in the Portal universe. Very, very cool stuff. And then even if you're a fan of Pistol Whip or not, join our Discord. You can talk with us, chat with us, hang out with us. Discord, pistolwhip.gg. That is Pistol Whip the game. Pistolwhip.gg. GG. As in the two letters, GG. Good luck.
Dan, how about you? You got anything you'd like to send out to the world?
Oh, Antony pretty much covered it there.
Awesome.
All right, and with that, roll the show out.
If you like this episode of Head Mounted Destinations, please share it with your friends. Word of mouth helps us out. You know, getting more ears on our show is going to help us make more things and give you cooler content. To get notified about new episodes, go to headmountedpodcast.com and sign up for our email list.
You can listen to the show on YouTube, Spotify, Stitcher, or Apple Podcasts.
If you'd like to discuss this episode or suggest future topics, visit our subreddit at reddit.com/r/headmountedpodcast.
Thank you so much for listening. We will see you at the next Head Mounted destination.